All right, this is going to be a walkthrough that's fairly high level and direct to the point about how to create new I/O nodes. I'm going to be in the back end of GeoPix. This is the first time I'm making a video like this, so let me know if this is useful. If you'd like to see more, happy to do it. So we're going to make a node and add it to our library. So what am I talking about? Well, let's go into this macro. We have a ramp and an output, and if you go to create, you've got your kind of palette of options here. So under texture nodes, utility, let's just throw in a hue shift, for example, and connect this up. So this utility node allows you to kind of shift the hue of this texture, and we can also throw in a generator, for example, and do something like this. It's just a ramp going up and down. We could also let's do a sine wave, and we can plug this in here. It's a little intense, but you get the idea. You have kind of the option to control this manually as a slider, and we can also drive it with something else coming from GeoPix. So this is just an example, right? We have a lot of different ones in the menu here under utilities. We also have things like generative and effects. If you wanted to make new nodes into these categories, with what you see in this tutorial, we'll actually kind of show you how to do that with these as well. Things like capture and load. I mean, technically you could add stuff here. I don't recommend it though. These are more fixed categories. Same with like macro, system all, channels. You can make new, generators and utilities, not so much capture, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and dive into the network, and I will walk you through the exact steps to kind of create a new node from scratch. So to get into the network in GeoPix, you hold Shift and hit Escape, and this will take you into the network. Usually, though, you'll start off here, which is not really related to what we want. So there's a couple ways to get to the I/O graph. I'll show you the manual way. There's also kind of a shortcuts thing. You can go straight to IO_v2, but let's click the home icon. And from here, you can go into software, top, then IO v2. And from here, this is kind of the home base for the IO graph. We want to go to the IO templates v3. And in here, we have our familiar categories. We have system, texture, channel, and audio. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. We're not going to talk about any of that. We're going to keep this kind of straight and to the point. So let's make a move into our texture base comp. Here you'll notice that we have these, again, familiar categories, generative, effects, utilities. We're going to ignore these. What we talk about in this guide will be really good for adding to these three containers because these are more of your artistic or functional components that you can add to. So into utilities we go. And here we are with our currently existing objects in GeoPix. So at this point, you might be wondering, how do we create something new? The easiest way is to take something that already exists and copy it. So what I just deleted a second ago was something I had made from an earlier take of this tutorial, so we're going to remake that. Let's just go ahead and grab hue shift. We'll copy it and paste it with Control C, Control V. First thing you'll notice when you do this is that we have a link between these, and this is a slightly dimmer color, and that's because each of these is set up by default to be a clone template, which means that when copied, the copies of it will refer back to the clone template and always reflect, the inner workings of those and also the parameter layout, etc. So you can see this by clicking on something that already exists and going to the common page, clone master, and if we just pull this out, you'll see that we are referencing a node that is in the utilities folder. So basically, this node is referencing itself as the clone master, and so when you copy it, the copies are now referencing a different node, and that's why they look like a clone. Anyways, long story short, you do need to update this. So for your copied one, let's just call this test util. We'll take that name, go into its common page, clone master, and we'll update the last piece of the string here with that same name. If you do this correctly, it will turn to a similar tone of brightness as the others, and you will also lose that link because it's now referencing itself. So first step that we need to do, done. Next thing we'll go and talk about are these pages up here. So we have, in GeoPix, generally across the board, things that are all uppercase are things that you see in the GUI in the front end, and things with mixed case, lowercase, whatever. These are things that you don't directly control in GeoPix. You might control them indirectly through other functions, but they are not meant to be exposed to the user. So in the I/O tab, and this is true in the editor and I think also in the Perform tab, but how those get set up is different. In the I/O tab, general is fairly common across all nodes, and it's not something that typically you will mess with. Control, on the other hand, and also anything else that is all uppercase, this is kind of fair game. So in Touch, you can right click and customize components and you can start messing with stuff, but that's not quite the process in GeoPix. Things are a little bit more complex to make it less tedious, I suppose you could say. So what we actually need to do is go inside of test util. First, before we do that, let's go ahead and set a new default name for this node. And just for the sake of consistency, we'll just use the name of the actual node. So when you create this in GeoPix later, it's going to come up with this name by default. You can, of course, change that after creation, but it's useful to name it. Also, object types. You'll notice that these all say 11. Don't mess with this, and really don't mess with any of the things in these other tabs unless you know what you're doing. For the most part, it's not really necessary. Object type denotes, what kind of I/O node it is. So in this case, 11 is what we want. So if you're copying from something in the same category, you shouldn't even have to think about those things. So let's go ahead and go inside test util. Now, I have a lot of stuff in here, and again, I won't really delve into most of this stuff. The three things of importance are these three right in the middle. These are dynamically created and destroyed using this component right here. And this stuff here, well, let me reselect these. These things, these four nodes, don't touch those. You probably don't need to. This one, you don't need to modify it, but you might need to plug something into this first input. This is your texture preview. It's essentially what you see in the I/O editor as your node preview. You can basically create anything to put in there. It can be a movie file. It can be some kind of composition of multiple different images. If your node is like a multi-output node, you can do whatever you want. But for most use cases, you just plug one of your outputs into there. Maybe it's the primary one. Maybe it's the only one. And you're good to go. So, okay, that leaves us with three nodes. This one is pretty self-explanatory. It's just a help documentation for this node. So you can go in here and modify that stuff. Obviously, the stuff up here is general. It should be the same for all nodes. And, things below that are kind of your custom ones. This is the manual process, of course, because you have to describe what your parameter does from a user's perspective. It's okay to have more things in here that aren't being used because they'll never get used or showed if those parameters aren't present on the parent, but this is optional. You don't have to have help documentation. Next, we have generate framework, which has two buttons. Generate revert, we're going to talk about that here in a moment, and then custom. This is where the code goes. This is where you build your component. Go inside of here and you'll see that we have, for what this used to be was the HSV adjust, right? We just have an input texture, the HSV adjust, and the output. And we have some chop stuff to drive the hue offset. So before we get in here and start messing around, generate framework must be used to kind of deconstruct this and disconnect it from the parent. Because we have like a lower layer and a higher layer, this actually will be driving the lower layer, but instead of doing all this connections manually, this script lets you kind of automate that stuff. So anytime you're going to make changes to a component, you'll need to click revert. Once you've done that, forget about the parent parameters up here that we just closed. Just ignore them, and everything you want to do is here on custom. So let's go ahead and make a simple component. We'll make a new parameter called value min, and we'll just add that. And we can let this be a 0 to 1. and we'll set the default to 0.5. And this is all just straight Dutch Designer development at this point, this lowest level. I don't have to think about GeoPix too much. So we'll go ahead and open a parameters page for this. And we'll go inside custom. And so we can just delete the HSV adjust. And, we can honestly, we could delete all this stuff, but let's go ahead and keep it. It'll be a little bit easier to kind of refactor. So rename is important. Make sure that anything coming in is using the same name. It's not strictly necessary, but it just keeps things a little bit more modular and robust in case something in a different node has a different name. So here we are grabbing the parameter of our custom comp here, this guy right here. Of course, right now it's referencing the wrong thing because we've deconstructed stuff, but and this is also the wrong parameter. This doesn't exist anymore. So let's go ahead and grab our value min. Value min. All right, so value min, and this is not showing up for some reason. There we go, just a force cook issue. Let's go ahead and rename this to value min, and we'll call this in chop to value min as well. And of course, the reason I'm calling this value min is because I'm going to just throw down a chroma key. Chroma key, it has something called value min, and let's just drop a noise. We can see what this is going to end up doing. Value min is just dropping the alpha channel for stuff below a certain point. So very simple node. This probably isn't something you would set up in reality. You might do a chroma key that you have a little bit more stuff plugged into, but again, simple example. You can expand from here pretty easily. Let's call this vals. So if we have more things in here, eventually we can, set that up as we would like. So once we've done that, we have this all hooked up. Now the reason we're doing this is so that we can, have our custom parameter drive the value, but also we can pipe something in via GeoPix if we would like. This gives you the ability to have your cake and eat it too. You don't have to set it up this way. Again, this is just Dutch Designer development at this point. Source top. This will obviously, as a utility, require an input, but if you wanted to have some kind of a placeholder graphic, you could do that. You could put it in here. I recommend being careful with that because it can add some bloat to the nodes, which you want to keep that to a bare minimum, especially if it's a node you're going to use a lot. So, okay, we've set up our node and it's doing what we want. So we can go back up a level and normally if you're doing this manually, you would have to go up here and customize this parameter and delete all these pages and parameters that were from the old one and update them. But of course, we don't want to do that manually, so we can just click generate. And what generate does is it takes the inputs and outputs inside of custom, it replicates them, and it lays them out here and wires it up for you. And it also puts a number in front of them just to keep things a little more consistent. Notice that it took our parameter Sorry about that, might cut out. So as I was saying, it took our parameter chop, which was inside of the custom here, and it brought that out as well. So if you didn't have this plugged into the failover, it would not be present when you click generate. So here we are, we've got everything set up. If we wanted to go back in here and make some changes, it's important that we click revert. We go in here, make our changes. Maybe we want to call this I don't know. Maybe you just want to add another parameter. Let's go ahead and do that really quick. We can go ahead and add one called valmax. And we can set this as a default to 1. And at this point, we might want to modify some things, right? Let's call this pars value max. Oh, actually, you don't want to do this because you're going to need separate chop inputs. So val min. call this val max, and val max. Oops, I actually called that by a different name. So, okay, and at this point, maybe you want to just go ahead and use the names as they are. You could still put a rename in here, something like that. And then we can do vmin, vmax. And so we've made this update to our system. We go up a level, click on our generate parameters, click generate, and there we go. We have now replicated things out. And the other important thing that's happened is in the topmost parent parameters, we now have control, value min, value max. Those are hooked up with expressions to our lower level object, and we're good to go. So that's really the process. So to kind of put this to use and see how it works, we'll just drop this in here, and we'll create a generative. And sorry, now we're in utilities. We'll go over here to test util. We'll drop this in, and there we have it. We have a functioning new IO node. And as you can see, as we play with these sliders, it does what we expect. And if we drop a channel capture, sorry, not a channel capture, a generator. This is just a simple ramp. We can plug this in here and automate those parameters with other inputs in GeoPix. So that's kind of the gist of things, and hopefully that helps make some new nodes in GeoPix and create some cool things. If you have any other questions or want to see more like this, just let me know. Thanks.